open the meeting.
Okay.
Anything on the agenda that needs to be altered? In order, I have made a request, I sent an email but I don't know that, I don't know if Peter got it, but I am requesting, and he'll bring it up, to see a map of Filbert Run Park, which is the one we made a recommendation to. But I wanted the overlay, natural resource overlay on that map. And he said he'd be able to bring that up. It'll kind of explain a piece in the letter.
Yeah, I saw that. It's excellent. Define it
Yeah, I can
early.
pull that up.
And thanks for capitalizing. She capitalized on my letter.
Oh,
I wonder under new business whether we could include some, I'd like to see an effort made to match the $500 grant the city got from somewhere. I left you a message about this.
Yeah.
And I'd like to, I have an idea of a couple organizations that can maybe double that. I don't know whether you used it and you went to Hawaii yet or what you were planning to do.
That was the Arbor Day one, right?
Your Arbor.
Yeah, okay, so
It was a nice article in the paper.
Yeah, the Parks Department wrote that grant application and used it to support the Arbor Day thing.
Okay.
So it's already spent.
It's already spent.
Well, what I was
but we
hoping
could do it
was
next
see
year.
A couple organizations match it. Mine and Parks Foundation.
Yeah.
And make it 1,000. That was.
Well, we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Because it's offered yearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to
it's a great idea.
show merit.
Oh, okay.
good publicity.
I've lost my phone. I'll get it tomorrow. But no, it is.
Imagine Dorothy's going to talk about the Arbor Day event, right?
We love Dee Dee and her trees.
Yeah, we'll have you during comments.
Actually,
a couple
it's
of you
Arbor Day.
there.
During comments.
Derby Day.
Okay,
What was it?
So we'll add that in
no
communication.
members of the public here, but we're having a,
Okay.
I won't be there for any of that shit.
are you here to speak on a particular topic? You're on the agenda, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I'll
there's no public comments here unless somebody wants to pretend to be a member of the public. We'll go into new business discussion, improving developer communication with Natural Resource Committee for Natural Resources Overlay District applications. As you might remember from the last couple of meetings,
Are we doing the presentation first, or are we on to that?
well, I'm just going to say what led to it.
Yeah.
We were expressing the desire to have developers coming into NROS to come and see us and talk about what their developments are. And with that, Peter has something to discuss or present.
Present and discuss.
Okay?
Yeah. That's a draft of some language that we would be considering putting into our pre-application notes we can talk about.
Okay. So we're ready for it, I guess.
Great. Okay, so I'll introduce Matt. Matt Valela is a certified arborist and forester with PGE, and he is based here in Oregon City. So I'll thank Matt for coming, and he's going to talk to us about some ongoing discussions we have between the city and PGE to coordinate forest management and that sort of thing. So welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I take it this is the hot seat?
It can get warm, right?
Just as long as you're using renewable energy.
Nice, yeah, I appreciate the chance to talk. It's good to see everyone. I think everyone's probably seen our trucks around at least, and I wanted to give a little bit of background about our program. So we work with Asplund, they're our contractor, and part of our program, so everywhere within Oregon City, we trim all the trees back from the power line, so we make sure that there's safe clearance for reliable energy. And we come through every 2 years, so that's where we just kind of schedule those crews. They come through every 2 years and they just trim back from the lines. We shoot so we're required to maintain at least 3 feet of clearance between the power lines and the trees at all times, and to be able to maintain that just with the trees, the specific trees, and then also the environmental factors and just how fast they grow. We usually have to shoot for about 8 to 10 feet, which can be kind of difficult at times. And then depending on, there's some species as well, so there's some cottonwoods or big leaf maples, some of our faster growing trees that are directly under the power lines. and those we definitely have to trim back harder than that. So this at least, we had one meeting with Oregon City last year specifically on this, and then we're just starting to move forward in the process a little bit. But it started just because I think over the last few years it's been a little more difficult, or the last few cycles that we've been coming through Oregon City just to get clearance for the lines. And a lot of that we've been identifying, it seems like it's been more difficult to remove trees when we need to. And then also we've been seeing developers and homeowners planting just the wrong tree in the wrong place, which makes it more difficult for everybody in the first place. So we were just kind of coming up with ideas, and these were what we wanted to throw out there and work with the public and the city on, so that they know everything that we're doing. Some of those ideas, so there was this, so part of the notes here, I wanted to hit on a couple of those bullet points. We did talk about modifying the street tree list with Oregon City, and the list itself is fairly inclusive. It's got quite a few trees on it. It's got some good information on it, but there's some trees that are listed as compatible that are not actually nothing that we would consider compatible with the power lines. So there's some modifications we wanted to do to that, and then there's some that just don't list whether they are or are not compatible with the power line. So just to take that potential confusion out, so when developers or homeowners, if they're looking at the street tree list and seeing, you know, for example, a sweet gum or something, if that's, I don't remember if that one in particular is listed as compatible, but if it says it is, that's something that definitely is not. And the reason for that, at least, is our standard power pole, so for the distribution lines through the city, that where the lines are at, leaves that at about 35 feet above the ground. So we say our maximum height, we set that at about 30 feet. So anything with a maximum height of larger than 30 feet is something that it's just going to grow into the lines, and it's going to create issues in the future. So that's one thing that we wanted to work with the city on, just modifying the street tree list, and then also working with, I guess, jumping down a couple bullet points, also working with developers and being able to see those planting permit applications before they're actually approved. So if there is something that the city, you know, the developers are sending in an application to the city, they say, hey, we want to plant, we're required to plant X number of trees, if they don't even actually go out on the site in the first place, and then they submit to plant whatever, a red maple directly under the power lines, then that would be something that we would like to see that and be able to go out there and verify whether that's accurate or not. So that was another part. We haven't been up to this point involved with actually seeing those permits before the trees are planted. So I think that would help everybody out as well, just being on the front end of that. And then also streamlining the removal process. So that would be something else. Delineating between, there's a little bit of delineation right now as far as trees that are planted versus just volunteer trees. So if there's a cottonwood seed that comes over and seeds itself into the right-of-way, we want to make sure that we can delineate between that so that we can just remove those trees as we come across them. And then also just to make it kind of that streamlining the process, being able to work with the city a little easier. So we want to have direct access and just be able to provide simple notification, ideally, to say, hey, this cottonwood tree, it's just going to grow up into the power lines. We'd like to remove this before it becomes an issue. And then being able to just move ahead with that. And then I guess one of the last parts here is using tree growth regulators. So that's also something that we haven't done in Oregon City in the past, but we've used it in other areas on a limited basis, and we've seen very good results from that.
What is a tree growth regulator?
What's that?
What is a tree growth regulator?
So it is the product we have been using is called Shortstop. So that's something, I can provide links to all this stuff afterwards as well. But it's a synthetic chemical, so it's a man-made chemical that imitates, and it's basically identical to hormones that the tree produces. So these are hormones that the tree has, some that promote growth and some that promote, I guess, some that cause the tree to grow more in the branches versus more in the root structure. So there are 5 basic hormones within the tree. This one imitates one of those specifically. And when we use it appropriately, ideally you trim the tree, you would apply this tree growth regulator. And then the first year after growth, you would get maybe 10 to 12 inches of growth, but then the next 2 years after that, so it's effective for 3 years, you only have to apply it every 3
So
years.
it's growing slower?
Yep, the
At the
next 2 years.
same time, are you causing the roots to go down farther?
Yes.
I mean, so you're putting
it-
on 2 types, stunt it here, but to grow it there? I'm losing you on that part.
Sure, yep. So the first year, the trees usually only grow, depending on species, to maybe 10 to 12 inches while it actually takes effect. And then the next 2 years after that, trees generally only grow 2 or 3 inches a year. So it dramatically slows down growth. But by inhibiting those branches from growing, the tree still has the same amount of energy. It's drawing up just as much water. It's getting just as much light from the sun. So it can use that energy for other resources. So that's exactly, so the root structure, generally the tree allocates that to creating more roots, stronger root structure. The trees are usually more drought tolerant because it just has more roots there to be able to take in
Is
the
it
water.
applied to the soil?
What's that?
Is it applied to the soil or is it injected?
Yes, so it's injected into the soil around the base of the tree. So it's injected, I think maybe I guess I'm trying to picture a 6-inch diameter tree, maybe a cup, half a cup total, if that, of this chemical is used, and it's injected a couple of feet back from the trunk of the tree. So it's injected into the soil around the base, and then the tree takes it up. So it's applied right at about this time of the year when the tree is actually pulling up water, nutrients from the soil, and it just goes right up with the water. It doesn't have a very long lifespan in the soil itself, so it breaks down.
It's about the halftime.
It breaks down after a couple days, and I don't remember the exact
So you don't
numbers, but
expect it
it's
to getting into the groundwater or entering our streams?
That's what I'm wondering too.
right. So sensitive sites, that's really not much of a concern. It's within 48 hours, it's basically completely inactive, and then it's almost identical to the actual hormone that the tree produces. So it's synthetic. It's not natural. It's not derived from anything directly.
So with all that great root growth, are we going to have our sidewalks uplifting faster?
And then stunting the growth of the tree.
Yeah.
Well, I understand what they're
that's
trying to do it. I understand why they're trying to do it.
Yeah.
but
Sure.
where
I
I'm
know, I get it too.
concerned
I'm
about
just
the-
trying to think of, you know.
Concerned about the side effects.
Right.
Because, and I think that we're doing a better job that when we put forward our original tree ordinances in terms of parking strips, we didn't really take into consideration the size of the parking strips. And a lot of our neighborhoods that are 15, 20 years old, we're having tremendous problems with the sidewalks being uplifted by the roots of approved trees by the city at the time.
Right.
And so when you're talking about a hormone that increases the root volume and so forth, my concern was that you're also recommending trees that the roots are tending to go downwards and not coming right under the pavement.
That would.
That would lift up the pavement.
So I guess you're worried about, so the roots actually underneath the sidewalk developing more and pushing the sidewalk up?
Yeah, more volume and having
Right.
problems of lifting up the pavement.
Right.
Because we've had, that's been a serious problem in some of our
Yeah,
neighborhoods.
so a little background, that 2012, the Natural Resources Committee helped, we reviewed our existing older street tree list and updated it to accommodate more species of trees that were appropriate for narrower spaces and that sort of thing. And we had a certified arborist on the Natural Resources Committee at the time, and we did circulate that list, I think, to PGE as well. But yeah, a big part of that species selection, again, is a critical part of it. So, especially in our subdivisions where we have limited public right-of-way to accommodate all these things, you know, it's like the road, the sidewalk, the planter strip, the curb, the gutter, everything. So typical local street width for us is around 50 feet for everything, so, and then, yeah.
So it's something, as this is going through the process, maybe it's something to look at. If we're increasing root volume, is this going to have an unintended consequences on the sidewalks and so on?
Well, I think that's an open question still, and something to talk more about.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point, though. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. But I mean, kind of talking about the street tree lists and the trees that were planted in the past, a lot of issues, so as far as trees uplifting sidewalks, a lot of that is specific to the species of tree.
Yep.
So regardless of whether a tree growth regulator is used, it might speed up that process a little bit, but a lot of it, some trees just inherently have shallower root systems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of that would develop, I would think, regardless, but yeah, it could speed that up. I could see
So are you
that.
thinking about applying this not after the first 3 years, but for the rest of the life of the tree, as long as it's under a power line?
That's,
I wonder about the trees where power lines come in afterwards that are already there.
sure.
Well,
Right.
Yeah. Don't most of our subdivisions you have got underground utility services in most of our subdivisions now? The newer ones, don't we?
Yeah, a lot of the newer ones.
Yeah, so it's, so I'm throwing out this question too. Do the roots cause problems for you in terms of your conduits for your underground utilities?
We haven't seen those issues at all.
Okay.
Yeah. The primary issue as far as vegetation impacting our facilities is just overhead lines. So, yeah, we haven't seen that at all. But, I guess that would be, the chemical would be applied every 3 years.
Is it?
And ideally, we would start to initiate a tree removal process. So a lot of those where if we have a row of 20 red maples that keep growing into the power lines, we'd like to start with the tree growth regulator to slow down growth, see how much it actually affects and how much we can keep up with that growth. But then after that, start to maybe stagger replantings, because that is something that, I mean, it's not the most reliable solution out there. It's not, I mean, that depends on us applying it, so.
How widespread is this? Is it something you guys are applying routinely, or is it only special cases, or?
Within Oregon City, or just system-wide, I guess,
Yeah,
across?
system-wide.
We've used it only in select areas in the past, more as kind of an experiment to see how effective it was, because we've never used it until probably 2 years ago. We've never even used it. So we just started to use it, and we've been seeing great results. Within Oregon City, this year we've identified at least 3 locations throughout the city, and then there are probably another, I mean, there really aren't too many, maybe a dozen at maximum within the city
What are
itself.
the 3 areas? So I can get an idea. We're talking about going down Malala or Redland Road underneath the lines there, or are we talking internal? I don't know.
Sure, yeah. Most of them are, I'm trying to think of exact locations, and that's something I can send that out afterwards as well, a little map of some of those.
Well, I just
The
thought
3
maybe
sets at
you
least.
said identified 3 locations. I thought you might know them, so.
Right, I don't remember the roads. I think one was Myers. I'm not sure what the intersection is. The other one was off of Center Street, and then the other one, I forget what the third one is off the top of my head. But the 3, I mean, they're all either, so pear trees or red maples that were planted, and it looks like by some sort of new development. I'm not sure if it was a developer, or the city or someone, I'm not sure who actually planted the trees, but
Yeah, it's the
they're all,
developer with city approval, so.
Oh, okay.
We require that they do it, and then they select
Sure.
a species off of our list, so
okay.
that's what's going on.
Now, you say you've identified areas. Have you made applications, or have you just simply identified these areas where?
We've just identified them at this
Yeah,
point.
so
We haven't done any applications.
You have to go through the city process in order to get this approved?
There's no approval process for it that I know of. I've touched base with Pete, and we've talked about it a little bit. And I notified the adjacent homeowners, so we've talked to the homeowners, the businesses nearby, just to let them know and let them ask us any questions that they wanted to. And a couple of folks had some concerns just as far as, does it hurt my dog as they're walking by, something like that.
My concern is if you retard it you let it have its growth for 3 years and you start retarding it for the next 10, are you just like slowly killing it? I just, to me, it's just like, if
Right.
it's something so unnatural, but again, I'm the hugger.
No,
And I
yeah,
say,
it's,
I
yeah.
believe get tall.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, the way our code works, it does not exempt anybody from obtaining a permit and replacing the tree after the fact. So, I just want to be clear about that. And, that's something, we understand that PGE has rights to, do their stuff to maintain the power lines. And there is some language in our code about what a hazard is. And it distinguishes between an immediate hazard and then, other types of hazards. For example, slow sidewalk lifts. We consider that something that, a homeowner has to take care of the sidewalk and that sort of thing. So in those situations, we issue them a free permit and require that they replace the street tree after the fact, because that's what our code requires. And so I think what we need to work with PGE is a very, a clear process for not only what your right is to remove trees, but what the replacement options are.
Sure.
Because if it doesn't make sense to put a tree back in the same spot at all, or to put a different species of tree back in, that's what the city would like to see, ultimately. So.
We might have got ahead of ourselves. Are you done with your presentation? We ought to let you get through it.
Yeah, sorry.
No, well, we both did it. But yeah, if we're not done, please continue, and we'll hold off our questions until later.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's really about all I had. I mean, I wanted to touch on these main bullet points. We just want to, I think the three things, we're just trying to kind of streamline the permitting process, trying to get these trees out, and especially the invasives. I mean, some of those we run into, Ailanthus, Paulownia, those are just a win-win for everybody if we can remove those. So trying to streamline the removal process, the permitting process, using more of a integrated vegetation management plan, I guess. So using those tree growth regulators, and then being able to work with permitting ahead of time.
Getting copies of tree plans of subdivisions and commenting on those earlier in the process. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's...
I looked up I was looking up the regulator, and it doesn't, it's a gibberellic acid inhibitor, so it makes the trees, the internodes stay short.
Sure.
And the one thing I saw was that it's actually apparently routinely used by a lot of like Lowe's and Home Depot on a lot of their shrubs, because they sell better if they're shrubbier and shorter and they don't get damaged as much. And apparently it's been used in marigolds for years.
Yeah, a lot
So
of the trees
apparently this is
are-
widely used on all kinds of plants, so.
Yes, a lot of plants that you buy, at wherever, any nursery you go to, they just have it in the soil already for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
So,
So,
so yeah,
doesn't
I
sound
think
like
it
it's
is,
something new and scary, so.
right.
For me.
I think it sounds like it. Not many people are familiar with it, but it's, it's whenever you say we're injecting a chemical into the soil, people, that it raises a red flag.
Sure. And probably with us more than other people we might talk to. I guess the issue here for me is, shrubs are different than trees. In terms of what you expect out of them more.
Right,
than,
right, I agree.
And I guess my concern is you're talking about coming back every 3 years or so and repeating it. And yet you yourselves don't appear to have any experience beyond a 2-year period. And I think we'd feel more comfortable about it if you could maybe get presentations in terms of actual tree species, not shrubs, and to where they've had longer term experience in terms of how this has worked. I presume other municipalities have probably been using for some time.
Right, yeah, there are definitely some areas just throughout the US where it's used extensively. So that's kind of what we've been working with. We've been working with some other municipalities, some other utilities to try to see their experience with it. So yeah, it's new to us and we've just started using it over the last couple of years, but yeah, we definitely see this as being a good option instead of taking a large portion out of the canopy of these trees year after year. So
If you can provide through Pete information on a longer history, I think, with other communities and so
Somebody
forth,
our-
I think that would be
Yeah.
helpful
Portland
for
area
us.
too.
in
Yeah,
terms of us,
And I might
yeah.
be like way off track here too, but when you say removing trees from lines and stuff and applying this, I envision like going down Lynn Avenue and seeing all the vines over the PG&E and we lost several oaks on that road that took it down. But the vines are still on are you not able to touch those? And the vine I'm talking about is the,
You mean,
clematis is about,
It's a wild
clematis, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, the wild clematis.
Yeah.
Could we retard that growth? That's
That-
more like, can
That's
we retard
invasive
that?
species. That
Yeah, I
needs to be
know,
gone.
but I mean, but they're talking about invasive trees,
right.
and if that's the case, would it work on invasive species like that?
Right.
If you're chopping down to doing and saying, okay, well, we got an issue there, so.
Right, yeah, I'm sure.
create.
I cause more trouble than there is.
Create more root masses on those things? I don't know.
Oh, that's right, oh, God, yeah. Well, maybe
You
only
can
half
cut
of
those
it.
lines down all you want, they come right back.
Well, they do.
I don't see why that
I
would
have a
work.
question, I guess, regarding the
Sorry.
pruning you do and oversight of Asplin, with one of your major suppliers and all, of services and all that. When you come across cavity nest sites, and, which I'm sure you would, squirrels, whatever, is there any effort, or can there be any effort made or instruction to try to retain them if they exist?
PGE doesn't like squirrels.
Well, I do.
Yeah, but they lose power sometimes because of squirrels.
Well, okay, how about?
Yeah, my dog should.
Okay, affiliated with
Down here.
Yes, we actually have a fairly strong avian protection program with the company. So anytime our tree trimmers, at least, anytime they come across birds, any sort of nest, that's something that they're supposed to report. So that's also the same for honeybees, wasps, anything that they come across, any sort of habitat in the trees. They're supposed to be reporting that, and I know that we do report it regularly, and then we also have it in other areas as well. If it's a rookery for great blue herons, or if we know that there's a nesting site nearby for osprey or eagles, then we have certain times of the year that we're only allowed to trim in those in the first place. So, yeah, does that, I guess, kind of answer your question?
Yeah, other question, how many miles do you have to maintain, in Clackamas County? It must be hundreds and hundreds of miles of lines, I don't know.
In Clackamas County, I don't know if I could
Or Oregon City.
estimate. I would think so most of my area is Clackamas County, and it's right at about 2,000 miles.
Wow.
So I can't say across the
Yeah.
system. I couldn't even guess. I think that's one of the short facts on the PGE website. Total number of line miles, but it's a lot.
I'm almost reluctant to say this because it's not your reason for being here. But I see some of the pruning that's occurred, and maybe it's just because of the past procedures that have done it. They really look like butcher jobs to me. And I go through a neighborhood like Laurelhurst, and they've got trees that date back into the 1930s, huge trees.
Yep.
And there's overhead power lines there. You don't even know they've been pruned. They have been, clearly, but the lines are, but they look great. And frankly, a lot of the trees I see here that had the pruning, they don't look that great.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. Does PGE serve the Laurelhurst district? I presume it does. Yeah. So what do they do differently that we aren't doing here is the question I've got.
Yeah. I mean, so much of that is dependent on tree species and then just how far away from the lines it is. So all of our trimmers are, they're required to have at least 4 years of experience before they can actually be out there independently trimming. So they've got a lot of experience in doing what they're doing. But I mean, really, I think a lot of it is the placement of the lines in the first place, and then where the trees are planted, because I know there are a few, Apperson Boulevard, there are many historic trees along that. I think those were planted back in the late 1800s, and there are a couple sequoias, catalpas. Yeah, I guess it's such a individual basis as far as you look at one tree versus another, but yeah, I mean, if it's a big leaf maple or an oak tree that's planted directly under the power lines, or if the power lines were unfortunately placed right over it, there's only so many options available, so.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming out here.
Yes, absolutely.
This is the place to come, and
Yeah.
I think we just like to see a longer history of other communities and how their trees look like after maybe 3 or 4 spacings of 3-year periods or something like that to
Right.
get a feeling for it.
Right, yep, TGR, I mean, these regulators, they're really effective up until about 3 years, so that's when we just have to stay on top of it every 3 years. But yeah, I think that's something that's easy enough to come by, we can look that up, and
Okay.
I'm sure you guys could find that as well on the internet, you could probably find plenty of studies. And then I'll look into as far as the impact on curbs, root growth, if that is accelerated as well, so.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention is that, the Public Works Department is responsible for maintaining some city-owned properties, and then we have the Parks Department who maintains the parks. And so Public Works will maintain the storm ponds and things, and occasionally we have subdivisions where the storm pond is directly below a power line and that sort of thing. So the species of trees that are planted in the city-owned property are also a concern that we should, and that would be part of the subdivision review.
Sure.
So if we improve the notification process and work towards a better process for that, I think it'll be beneficial.
Sure.
Because we don't want to have to pull trees out of their, once they're planted, but.
Right, yeah, it defeats the purpose to plant those trees in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And especially for a homeowner, who expects it to be there and that sort of thing, so.
Yeah, definitely.
Before you leave, I have one more question. You and I were talking about wood chips. I've talked to some people in the city here. The chipping process and so forth generates a lot of material, and I know you try to make sure it can be used. I've also heard there's some concern that the wood chip material decays and contributes to sugars in the ground. And you know what? Anything else would too.
Yeah.
What is it,
Where do the branches go anyway, eventually?
Well, exactly. And so I've heard some people saying that they don't want to see wood chips used anymore. Are you running into this? It's a silly argument, in my opinion. Because you have a need to dispose of what's a valuable asset, I think.
Right. So you're asking if we're running into individuals who don't want to see wood
Or
chips being
cities
used?
that are saying we can't take it anymore, we don't want to use it.
No, I guess we really haven't seen that issue. Yeah, we're always trying to get rid of wood chips. So if you know anyone, or I guess you said
I was
that you've got
hoping in a future agenda, we might ask the people who work for Martin. I like Martin a lot, but those
okay.
people are telling me that we are prohibiting its use because it contributes to the sugar buildup.
Oh, sure.
Well, I'm sure it does, but if it's properly decaying.
Who's prohibiting the use?
Pardon?
Who's prohibiting the use?
I don't remember the lady's name, but she was telling me we don't want to see it used anymore, and I'm thinking.
Oh, I thought you said the city was prohibiting it.
Well, it was something that department was saying. I'd like to follow up on that sometime.
Oh,
and see
okay.
if
Yeah,
that's
I hadn't
true.
heard of any of that, but yeah, we
Okay.
can look into
Well,
it and ask
You know,
Martin.
I think you can overload an area too, putting 2 feet of it down or something, but it's a wonderful resource, and I know it's hard to get rid of. And McFarland's and the other few yard debris processor are not capable of handling really the volume that's out there from the public plus. So, anyway.
Sure.
I didn't know that you ran into anything on that.
No,
Okay.
no, yeah.
I love your wood chips. Okay.
But I mean, you're bringing this up, and are you saying the parks don't use it, or they
Well, that's,
against it?
John Waverly was even telling me that they're thinking about not
that's
encouraging its
Parks
use.
Department.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's about.
I'll ask John about it.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see what the reasoning might be.
Okay.
It probably has to do with NPDS, National Pollution Discharge Levels or something, I don't know.
I don't know, maybe it attracts
Yep,
attracts bees or something. Sugar.
Don't you go through the natural resource, I mean, to the Parks and Rec and say it's so bad because it's attracting bees.
I know.
You'll be in real trouble.
Or sorry, wasps.
Well, John's really good, and Martin's people are really good too, but I was hearing this, and I'm thinking, okay.
Okay, well, yeah,
All right.
we'll look into that. So I'll be following up, and Martin will be following up and working with PG in the coming months to coordinate these policies
Right.
better. And we
Really,
appreciate
really
the
good to have you
opportunity.
here.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. If there are any more follow-up questions, would that just come out after the meeting? Or?
If you guys have, if the committee has questions for you, they just want to send them through me, and then we can provide that information back. Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, thank you.
Thanks a lot, man.
Well, I guess the big concern would have been the half-life of the material, but it doesn't sound like it's almost an hour's maybe or something like that, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Fairly quick. It's almost, I mean, if it's rainy outside or if the water's too saturated, we can't apply it because that just,
Sure.
it's just
Right.
becomes
Can
inactive
you
before the trick
use
takes
it on
place.
sea lions? Can we?
The question is, what part of the sea lion does it inhibit and what part of it?
Yeah.
I mean, if it gives them bigger jaws, we don't really want
But
it.
it helps reproductive desires to diminish.
Thank you.
Less sea lions, right?
I was thinking you had to.
I don't think plant
down
hormones
blended.
work too well on
Is that,
animals.
that probably doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, you probably know.
Kind of species specific there.
All right.
Animals don't tend to have gibberellic acid.
Okay.
All right.
Now to our new business. I think this is maybe our third meeting talking about this, but the Improving Developer Communication with the Natural Resource Committee.
Sorry, I'm going to lower the screen. It might make a bit of noise here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Go ahead and finish introducing.
Okay,
Melissa.
so, I mean, is this something you're bringing up, or is it the map I was mentioning later?
Oh, well, I was going to talk about the new business
We were talking
item.
about having the same, the same input power in developments that are in natural resource areas that neighborhood associations would have in terms of developments that are coming into their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's been a broader discussion of that. We got it here as an item. And it seems to say new business, but it's the developer communications with this is this developer. Okay. You're talking
Well,
about
this is the general topic that I understood we wanted to discuss about improving
Right.
early communication with the developers about applications within the Natural Resources Overlay District.
Right.
And so the discussions that I had with Laura Turway, and then subsequently Laura has had discussions with the city manager about this. So I just want to stress that this is the beginning of a process discussion. Currently, we have a requirement that any developer for any land use application first meet with the neighborhood association that their development is within or proposed to be in prior to filing a land use application. And that's actually city code requirement. So then the purpose of that is citizen input in the land use process, which is statewide planning goal number 1. So anytime you see anything in our code about talking to the neighborhood or notifications and things like that, it's all about statewide planning goal 1, which is citizen input in the land use process. And there's a number of ways that you do that. You do it through not only this requirement to meet with a neighborhood association, but you also do it through the formalized public notice period, public noticing, which includes going 300 feet, for a land use application beyond the tax lot and has to go in the newspaper sometimes if there's a public hearing. The vast majority of applications that we process require a mailed notice to every property owner. We're not talking about that type of thing for the Natural Resources Committee, but we are talking about something that would provide an opportunity to coordinate the timing with your meetings, and that's kind of the thing, because you only meet once a month, and occasionally not even that, because we might have a cancellation or something. So what we preliminarily discussed was when we write notes to the developer, which we're required to do, is provide a written set of directions to the developer on how to put their land use application together. And it says, contact this neighborhood association, here's their contact info, and that sort of thing. We would include some language in there that recommends talking to, or suggests talking to the Natural Resources Committee for an application within the Natural Resources Overlay District, since that is, the Natural Resources Overlay District comprises what are adopted sensitive resources in our comprehensive plan. And that by adopted resources, I mean resources that have been specifically identified on the city's Goal 5 inventory, which is natural resources, cultural and historic resources. With that in mind, I drafted some initial language and wanted to discuss that with you and put it up on the screen, and we can talk about it. And you can suggest to me what you think would make it more effective or better. I think, I think bearing in mind here that this is not something that's required, and it's advisory, but also bearing in mind that we have specific standards that we have to follow and the applicant has to follow, and they have to hire a natural resource specialist professional to put that application together when they put their application together. So
we're looking, I guess, at your quote here, the things that are in quote, and this is what you're recommending. Applicants apply for all type 2 and higher applications within Natural Resources Overlay District subject to such and such are encouraged to schedule and attend a meeting with the Natural Resource Committee prior to submitting the application. The NRC may comment on all land use applications with the Natural Overlay District pursuant to the adopted bylaws.
yeah.
And the purpose of the meeting.
So there's some complications with respect to public meetings laws and that sort of thing. So I think anything up to 3 people talking to one another in the Natural Resources Committee is probably okay, because that's not a quorum. That was the discussion. And so, but you couldn't have more than 3 people talking to each other about a land use application without a notice of public hearing.
This is 2 people talking, and then that person talking with another person
And getting their
the mayor of
opinion.
Beaverton was taken to court because there weren't more than a quorum talking about it at any given time, but 2 people on their commission were talking, and then they talked to a 3rd person and the 4th person.
It's a serial meeting.
It's called the Dolan decision, and you want to make sure if you're talking to him about it, you don't talk to me about it, or don't. Well, I guess you can talk to me, then don't talk to her. So you got to be very careful. Right? It gets you in a lot of trouble.
And so if there's a complication, and the other thing that we're concerned about is that if we probably process about 20 to 30 type 2 natural resource applications in any given year. That's probably an overestimate.
A year. So whatever.
Yeah, either with another application or standalone. So potentially you'd be overloaded in a meeting with this sort of thing, and that's a concern for staff as well as for you guys.
Do you normally farm those out to a consultant like David Evans to help you with the NROD review? Or how do you handle it?
Yeah, so the city contracts with David Evans and Associates to review what a developer's natural resource specialist turns into the city to make sure it meets our code. And because we don't have anyone on staff who's qualified to make those findings. So we ask them to. And they're either a wetland specialist or a biologist or something that's defined in our code as required. Another idea that we had since I wrote this report and talked to Laura about, which you guys can think about, is bearing in mind that we've got a code that sets the standard for how these reviews are done and sets the standards for the impact and the mitigation. Is there some standard set of best practices that the Natural Resources Committee would like an applicant to follow that you could, give as a standard recommendation and that we could draft as a policy together to give to applicants? And it wouldn't necessarily have to be code requirements, but it couldn't necessarily, it couldn't conflict with the code is the thing, yeah. So that's the other idea.
Case in point, Kanema, we heard about this over and over again.
Yeah.
That one jurisdictional body, TSL, defined the zone, but the buffers weren't included.
Right.
And if, I could see us having a role in suggesting a more complete.
Yeah, so in that example, you're recommending something that isn't in the code, but which the applicant could choose at their discretion to follow.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, it's advisory and it's.
Because it's advisory, yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah, so that's kind of what the sideboards would be. Other ideas that you come up with in this process, we could happily discuss and.
Cavity nest sites and riparian zones.
Right.
Normally are not addressed, but they're important.
Beaver habitat.
Yeah.
Things that we've discussed in the past. I can think of any number of things, yeah. So that was the other idea.
Okay.
And getting back to this suggested language, is there any comments on it or additions that you'd like to make? And we'll be happy to bring this back for further revision. Or any ideas at all about it, because it's kind of new territory for us.
Well, this is not code language because it's not required, which is good. I mean, I don't want to tie anything up with a process that's going to take too long.
I think,
but
someone rightly pointed out that when you put something, whether it's in the code or not, but when you put it on official letterhead and give it to a developer or an applicant, they are going to take it seriously.
Yeah.
So, so it needs to be well thought
I kind
out.
of was mentioning that possibly maybe we could put together a small packet of recommended plantings to developers of trees that they would, I mean, that's already developed, but I mean, encouraging them, if they take down one of the big trees, to replant another tall tree, maybe encourage them to have their own bragging rights and make it a memorial tree or a heritage tree, because they are going to have already arborists on the sites, and we can encourage them to make.
Well, there are already requirements.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say, is there a nicer way to put it in language to encourage developers to, if they can't save trees in the natural area, that because it is their option, that possibly they could make amends by doing some other things. That's like mediation or.
Yeah.
But, you know, giving them bragging rights. If they're gonna take down a big tall tree, we've heard them say, yeah, we're gonna take that tree down. Plant another big tall tree. Choose the spot that would be appropriate so it won't harm their development because they're gonna take it out anyway. Let them have bragging rights. Let them write their name of their development on that tree. It puts another big tree in the system. It will grow and make a little community love it. And who cares has the bragging rights on it? The Vista House was named after a developer. It's getting saved, it's still being
yeah, I
called the
mean,
Vista House. It's
yeah,
a
I
wonderful thing.
Sorry, go
Sorry, I
ahead.
was going to say, is there already a list provided by the Planning Commission?
Yeah, we have various lists. We have a native species list for, general planting in the natural resources areas. We also defer to more up-to-date lists, like the Portland plant list.
But for mitigation planting, is there a certain
well, for
selection they have to
mitigation
select from?
plantings, you're gotta use native species or at least native hybrids, I believe, is what we had said. And that would be put together by a wetland specialist or a botanist or a landscaper.
I was going to say, within your NROD, those protections are already there. And
Yeah,
if
those are
development is
there.
going to remove a tree, they have to go ahead
Yeah.
and mitigate for
We
it.
also have a list of native and heritage species that we call heritage
Yeah.
species.
We need
Spell that
um,
out.
for
We're not getting any of that anymore.
on residential sites, when there's new residential homes, part of the code that governs residential home design actually includes a section on landscaping, and that includes a list of heritage tree species that actually count double if you plant them. So if you plant a white oak or a native redwood or Douglas fir, you don't have to plant as many
it's
of
like a
them.
twofer.
Well, that's a
under
good
our
thing.
code.
A twofer,
Yeah,
that's a better
it's a
thing.
twofer.
Twice the height, I'm liking
Yeah,
that.
it's a twofer.
bragging rights too if they wanna pay for it.
Developers do plant those species because they don't have to purchase as many of them.
Yeah.
And they still have to be a certain caliper.
The point she was bringing up was the caliper of the tree that's mitigated.
Yeah,
And,
right.
Yeah.
And you said remove a heritage tree and plant another one. You're not going to have a 100-year-old tree replanted for the one they cut down.
Well, I know,
you're looking
but
for
we
some
don't
kind
need
of
40,
minimum.
yeah, we don't need 40-star magnolias. You know,
Well,
if we're taking
yeah, I
it.
think that's a
So, I
really
mean,
important point. In the tree mitigation code, it does not prescribe what species you replant. So I'm talking about that residential design code separately. Under the tree mitigation code, it doesn't tell you what species to replant right
But-
now, so. it
But in
could.
terms of the NROD,
In terms of the NROD, yeah, That
it is
does.
specified.
it is specified. But it also says, a certain number of trees and shrubs as well, and ground cover. So all natives, yeah. So that is, and it's based on diameter of tree removed or impact area, depending on whether you're removing trees or whether you're just clearing blackberry.
I mean, when I looked at this, I was looking at NRODs.
Yeah,
When
right.
you're talking about an individual developer coming in, it's not in a natural overlay. I don't, I think that's out of our purview.
I just didn't know if we can like,
Staff sends to feel that
Right.
way.
put it like a package saying, oh, it's a great
Well,
thing.
no, I don't think there's
I
any
mean-
problem to put together
Yeah.
something that is a recommendation for developers. I think that's great. This particular item here is one we're really charged with in our, as a committee. And I think there are fair protections in terms of mitigation that are already there.
One question I've always wondered, and I didn't see it, was the long-term maintenance and assurance of natural function. People come back in and they take out all the understory, that you maybe required them to establish. And then bark test the whole thing down the stream.
Right,
You know,
so.
Wood chips?
Bring it back around.
Are there elements in the NROD
In
standards?
the code, there's a requirement to record either a conservation easement or more commonly a deed restriction that requires that it be maintained. And if you remove the original plantings, then you have to replace them. So and that runs with the land.
Okay.
Yeah. The first 4 years after the planting occurs is an actual active monitoring and maintenance period where they got to report. As some do and some don't.
They have to report and show you
Yeah.
photographs, don't they? Or from
That's
fixed
what the
points?
code says. They've got to take, photographs. They've got to tell us exactly how much survival there was in any given year and then replace what wasn't. And then if they get to 80% establishment at the end of 4 years, they're good. And after that point, the deed restriction governs, and it's the property owner's responsibility. Yeah. So that's how that works. And then it does work in those instances. I think the conservation easement is the more powerful tool, but it's a lot longer document, but it has much more legal authority than the deed restriction does, because deed restriction just runs with the land. It's usually a
Right.
smaller area,
Right.
and we don't always know if someone's done something.
Yeah.
Whereas the conservation easement gives a lot of right to the city to enter onto. It doesn't give the city the right of entry, but it does give us the right to go in and enforce something on a big basis. And sometimes those easements or restrictions are within storm drainage easements as well. So there's a conflict, or at least a balance, not a conflict, a balance that you have to strike between maintaining a storm drainage and keeping it running, and preserving the vegetation that's there as well. And like cottonwoods, because we have one subdivision that has some pretty mature cottonwoods right in the middle, and they're always raining down branches on nearby homes, or at least their fences, not the homes. Although people get concerned when you see a cottonwood leaning, and that's covered by homeowners insurance, but it's
And
not.
we almost lost a couple of vehicles on
Yeah.
the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council had junior ROTC working on that area there next to Clackamas River, between that, on the trail there. And we had people there, they were working, and all of a sudden about a 12-foot part of the upper trunk came down, very close to them, came right between my car and their pickup truck. I managed to miss them both, fortunately. But yeah, they're dangerous.
Yeah.
Or
Cottonwood's gonna be
cottonwoods
very
get such a
dangerous,
bad
for sure.
rap. I'm
No,
standing up
it's
for
a
the
wild.
cottonwood.
Yeah, in the right
Not a
locations, it's fine, but it's tough in an urban environment.
Well, Public Works
Beavers
has
left them.
an erosion control staff. I'm going to call them dirt cops, people that go out and look for erosion compliance. They do. They look for compliance to make sure that erosion's not occurring and all that. And so who does the enforcement on the Enron long-term?
Enron,
Is it
yeah.
you guys, or do you farm it out again to David Evans?
That's a really good question. Like any aspect of our code, it is complaint-driven right now. So unless someone complains that something bad is happening or something's wrong, we won't know about it. So that's how it gets enforced. And that does happen because we have maps and people know that there's a stream back there and that there's supposed to be a vegetated corridor that's maintained. And
Unfortunately,
And then who
our
would investigate code compliance or?
code enforcement
Code enforcement.
would investigate and, with planning helping, because we are the ones that understand the regulation and what was done there initially and whether there's a deed restriction in place and that sort of thing.
And are they trained to be able to recognize what the deficiency would be?
No, that's up to us, because we would have the original planting plan.
Okay.
And, even if it's 10 years after the fact and things have grown up, you can look back at the original planting plan and figure out what should have been there. And a lot of times, the bigger sites, as you know, will naturally regenerate. So there's a lot more vegetation there that was originally planted, but if it's completely bare, you can usually tell. And someone's just removed all the native stuff and put in landscaping and some other type of thing. Yeah, so that does happen. And oftentimes they are legitimately unaware.
Right.
And other times they are aware but choose not to comply. So either way, when Nancy Bush was here the last meeting, you know, that's the process that we would follow. Yeah. So it's the first letter is an educational letter and a recommendation to voluntarily comply, and then if that doesn't happen within a given amount of time, then we move to the notice of violation, and if that doesn't do anything, we make it a court issue. Yeah.
Well, I personally, just looking at it right offhand, I kind of like the wording of it. I mean, it does recognize that we don't really have any power, but still that recommendation coming forward, I think, is rather important.
Okay.
The best practices thing, I'd be really willing to spend a little time with anybody on some ideas for long-term maintenance. That's my feeling, is that's where you lose it, is when people come back in and start thinning to the
Changing.
point or pruning to the point of restrictive pruning where the plant is restricted and it doesn't develop the way it should, or massive thinning, thinking that that's good, and then the layered canopy goes away that would have value. I'd be willing to work on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in our code. Our code is like a regulatory thing, you know, it's just regulatory.
Okay.
There's nothing in the code about other types of habitat, you know, so it doesn't talk about what's great for wildlife and this,
Right.
that, and the other thing, you know, that's
Right.
all good educational material. And when you read Metro Title 13, which is the big document that governs what all cities are supposed to comply with, you know, one part of it is regulatory. The other part of it is really encouraging cities to go to the next step and try to incentivize and educate people to take care of habitat in their backyard. And that's nothing you can do with a regulatory document. So to that extent, having a best practices list that you guys put together would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
So anybody want to?
And I don't think we would have to reinvent the wheel in this case.
Right.
We would have something tailored to Oregon City.
The benefit of having something, I guess, on a more formal basis for us in terms of recommendations is when people come to us on these things, that we can talk about those specific issues.
Yeah. So following through on that idea, if they come and talk to us about a prospective application and then, you know, that they haven't filed a land use application yet, so there's no public record open at all. It's, you know, it's going to be a public meeting and they're going to be there and the public might come because they're going to see it on the agenda. And that may dissuade some people from coming because, you know, I'm thinking worst case scenario. So somebody hears a rumor about a development and it's going to do such and such a thing in a natural area, and, you know, you hear all sorts of things, right? So that's one concern. How do you keep that a constructive and advisory dialogue and not let it become a public hearing? Because it's not a public hearing. It is an informational advisory meeting between somebody who voluntarily comes before you and asks for some guidance, you know, to enhance their project. They don't have to be there. And if there's some, you know, inadvertently somebody comes in and complains or starts making overtures about development being a negative thing, then that's something we want to avoid. So.
Would it be better to have what you were suggesting, like to have a best practices
That was one of the reasons why we came up with that idea.
People who want to develop it, and then
Yeah.
if they wanted to ask further questions, they could come to the meeting rather than having them call, you know, all of them
Yeah.
come to all the meetings?
That would be preferable. As far as staff is concerned,
Right.
that would be preferable.
Yeah.
And I think that's a soft approach to approach somebody too,
Right.
saying, we're a community that's embracing this, and we'd like you to embrace it too.
Right, and if you have
you're
questions, you
embracing
can
it,
come
we're gonna
to the
embrace
meeting.
you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, no, really,
Yeah.
Nancy, I think that's the direction that, that staff would prefer we go. And, you know, I think it would be a very constructive thing.
Well, do you want to formally set up a group here that's going to look at this?
Sure.
Yeah, we would add this to our work plan.
I'm calling
Yeah.
it best practices in natural resource maintenance,
And
management, or whatever.
I
And run
think,
overlay areas.
Yeah.
I think Trent would be a good person, his forestry background.
Good idea.
Put in
Yeah,
that group.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Remember, when you do this, you're not making recommendations for specific projects that are coming before you, because that would be a conflict, you know.
Right.
that-
We just need to have general best
Yeah,
practices.
just as
If it's
general
a
best practice.
riparian area, or if it's a
Right.
Yeah,
right.
forested area. or-
Yeah.
so,
Mel Huey every year does a natural resource review program for 30, 40 different groups in Portland, right next to Metro headquarters. Mel's one of the chief planners that's been interested in natural resource things forever. And it'd be really neat for us, I get this call every year. Last year we went down and had a booth and then did a little presentation. It'd be neat for us as a committee to maybe think about getting involved in that, to let the people there know that we have a city that's working on this stuff.
Right.
You
When
know?
is that?
Yeah,
Do you remember when it is?
I'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
What's
It
the name
comes
of
up
the,
about
is
a
it
month.
Mel Huey?
Mel Huey.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to check, that'd be great, if you
I
wouldn't
know I've
mind.
met him at some point, but
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And if you can give me your email and all that, you and I can at least talk.
Yeah.
Whatever, you know.
well, you'll have her email address on
Yeah.
the stuff you get from Peter.
yeah.
I don't look at it. I have people read this stuff to me. I'm sorry. I'm your basket case here, okay?
But the point is, if you do a reply to all, you'll have it on your email
Oh, okay.
list to
All right.
go ahead to.
Well,
So,
I'll still put it down.
help me get started here. You know, Matthew helps me with this stuff, so, you know.
Can you read that?
no, I can, but the questions can't hear.
Well,
Wow, that's pretty, yeah, I think
It's like my name
I can
without
read
the
it.
T
Yeah,
at the end,
yeah.
because Linfield has an issue
Yeah.
with putting people's
Yeah.
last letter of their name on there.
Wow. That's pretty good.
We're gonna have a support group for people who
Yeah.
lost the last, and you know,
Yeah.
so the students always send the stuff to the wrong place.
Sure.
Okay.
It didn't get to you, that's because you
So
put a T
Doug,
on there.
would this
didn't
be
you? Oh, why not supposed
tabled
to?
for our next agenda, or?
Should we change the language a little bit to
Yeah,
better?
whatever.
Yeah, why don't, well, what you might do is, if you guys get together, go ahead and if you have some recommendations to deal
Okay.
with that, we're not, I don't think we're really passing on this today.
Right.
And so you can use that as kind of the beginning draft of it if you want. Nancy, do you think you go ahead and communicate via email, but include trends, see when you guys could get together?
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
good idea. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'll figure out his email.
Yeah, just let me know. Work on the language.
See if he really wants to do it. He may be going, no, 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 no.
He's watching from somewhere else. Going, "Huh?"
No, I'm not doing it. Here's my phone. Call somebody, quick. So that's when you know, come to the meeting, you get.
That's right. That's exactly the way it works. Trent, if you're watching.
Careful, we might get a phone in.
All right. Anything else?
We're going on to the approval of the minutes. A lot of minutes to look at. Thank you very much.
Well, you don't have to approve them all tonight.
No,
Just,
I did look at the last one, and I'd be willing to accept the motion. Has anybody looked at them all at this point?
I looked at 3/4 of them.
I looked at 3 of them.
If you haven't all looked at them, then
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no hurry here. We want to make sure that we haven't omitted anything or misspelled anybody's name or something like that. And I
Are these
actually haven't.
up somewhere, like if we can go into the website and find these?
Yeah, well, these are on the website
Okay.
underneath this agenda
Under this
item, so you
agenda.
Okay.
can.
So you'll be able to click on them and pull them up. Let's make a commitment to look at the ones that you brought up to date there.
We
And,
start on October?
well, yeah, that's the most recent ones, but I think it's going to be very difficult for us to go ahead and say, no, the minutes are correct or the minutes are not correct.
Yeah, I don't-
But it'll be
Yeah.
a tremendous benefit to us to remember what the heck we were discussing at a given time. So
Sure.
there'd be a real benefit to doing that. And then if you know, in fact, there was something that was omitted, that particular one, then
Okay.
bring it up for a formal,
Yeah.
for a
So should we
formal
all
vote.
review these for the next meeting?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll,
Homework.
we'll table this for the next meeting.
Okay,
The other thing oh, sorry, Doug, go ahead.
you go ahead. I did.
Okay, so we're on the communications.
We're on the communications part. I wanted to, I asked Pete if he'd be able to bring up the map of Filbert Run, like I
Yeah.
mentioned, and with the Enrod overlay on that particular map. And in the letter, I made a specific reference. It wasn't a reference, but it was something that I believed to be the case based on a presentation made by somebody in the neighborhood association, in the Filbert Run Neighborhood Association, which is not meeting anymore. It meets in conjunction with the South End Neighborhood Association. But there's something based on that. I think he said something that was correct, and I wanted to look at the map to see if it was true. It actually has to do with the overlay act. I'll talk about it before he brings it up here. We've heard Paul talking about the issue of this state designated stream that is and have been included in our buffers. And I will say that Laura Turway, our planning director, had submitted a grant request to Metro to actually look at these. However, and she was very positive about it, but I think she also got some direction to submit some other grant requests to Metro. And they ended up having higher priority in the process. So we did not get the grant to look at the overlay districts formally and updating that. But he's bringing this up now, and that he might have to try to pull two maps together, both the park itself and the overlay district. I don't want to sign myself out.
Yep. So I'm using OC Web
GIS.
Maps, which is
Okay.
our online map that anybody can use if they've got access to the website. So, and here is the overlay.
Yes. And the problem is, it's accurate, and that's not, can you bring the whole park in?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
We've got an aerial photo.
That is not an accurate picture of what we have there.
Right.
And I'm gonna stand up and speak to it.
Yeah, good, please do.
And I think that when we wrote the grant application, they did do the proper delineation and,
Oh, did they?
yeah,
What you see here, the stream is not at that location. What you see there is a lot of upland trees, and it's a really nice area. But the stream actually runs down this direction, and it cuts into a stormwater system that's here.
right.
And
Yeah.
and I think there's a stormwater overflow here, and water can carry on and then go back into the
Oh,
stormwater
okay,
system.
I'll turn the storm on.
This stream that comes down through here is not actually in the overlay, so it was misplaced on our maps then.
Got it.
And I actually mentioned in our letter of recommendations to review the overlay, because I was pretty sure this was the case. Pete, I'll let you talk to Laura a little bit about this, because we get this grant. I'm sure the state is going to give the grant for the planning of this park, and we perhaps can incorporate that particular piece into part of the planning documents that we put forward in terms of the design. And I'm kind of recommending that we might proceed in that way.
Okay.
Where the stream comes in, Park is taking is going to take a tour of that. But where the stream comes into the stormwater system here, right there, it's heavily incised. Now, the stream is only there for big stormwater events. It's not, it's a very intermittent stream. But when it does flow through there, it does have an impact on it. And if you go out there,
okay.
you'll actually see it.
Yeah.
When are you gonna do this prac tour? I'd like to see this.
I can check at a PrAC meeting that's coming up and find out if we can extend the invitation to the Natural Resource Committee.
Okay, that'd be great.
So,
And you said the state is gonna fund a plan?
well, no, the application's been made to the state for a grant,
State of
to
Oregon,
the design, yes. To
State of Oregon Parks?
Yeah, the body there that actually gives out grants to municipalities.
Okay.
So that application's been made,
I can see where that's.
and I'm pretty,
Runs, it's the little green area.
no, and that's not, here's the stream.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
that's where the stream is. The stream is not where it's shown there.
Green.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
And
where it is.
so,
That works.
so that stream is not going through the streets.
Right.
Okay.
That's a great picture, thanks.
Yeah, that's the 2017 aerial layer. So that
Yeah.
just got uploaded.
There's,
Yeah.
Wow.
I think you can see it. I didn't notice, I was walking,
Zoom in a
the
little
grass
more.
was just cut, I just noticed in the last couple of weeks. There is this another, it looks like it's off a piece of property, but it looks like it is a small stream that comes out probably through stormwater and joins this one too, so there's another one coming through here.
Okay, yeah.
In the blue area is what, a mistake?
Well, that would be the old adopted Title III layer. So,
Oh, I see.
you know, when you adopt your overlay, you kind of have to
Right.
take your best guess. And so this is outdated.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the point is, it's not updated.
It's not updated.
So it's the same. The thing is, when Paul has come to talk to us on several occasions, it's probably not the only one, and we know that there's this one too. So there's a reason to update the
Right.
whole
No, I agree.
inventory.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, and this is another example.
And the vegetative cover in that area, what is it? Is it filbert trees or is it
It looks like
all these green bands?
No, there's a lot of native trees in there.
Okay.
some big Doug firs. Looks
So
like
it wasn't a filbert orchard necessarily?
Well, I don't know. It's called Filbert Run, but I don't
Filbert
know
Run
if
was
there
a
are filberts in the
subdivision.
area. I can't answer that question. And there may be some filbert trees in there,
Yeah.
but no.
It may have been. Who knows? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and whenever, if this was a private developer site, you know, and they wanted to develop that as houses, which is not going to happen, but the requirement both on the city or developer is to ground truth that resource. It doesn't take the protection away, but it does figure out where it exactly is, and the vegetated corridor is based on that new delineation. So, yeah.
So this is the letter that we asked, authorized
We
you
were
to go
supporting,
ahead with.
well, yeah, we supported it and we were supporting it from the aspect of our things.
Sure,
And I mentioned in there, and looking at the
Yeah.
overlay.
Okay.
That's
in the
great.
letter.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. The other thing I put before you was the Backyard Habitat Program is looking for a grant.
Before we
Oh,
do that, I'm
sorry.
going to make a
Sorry, Doug.
request of you. Could you mark this map here and send it over to Phil Lewis? I don't know how familiar he is with working maps and so forth.
Oh, right.
Because I do want to bring it up there at the PrAC as well.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so the other item I have is a letter addressed to Gail Shalom, who's with Water Environmental Services, and it's a support letter that Backyard Habitat Program has requested a support letter from you, and this is some suggested language in support of their grant application to the River Health Program. And it's called a River Health Grant.
Right.
And you had a presentation from Susie Peterson of the Backyard Habitat Program.
Right, that was great.
Yes, it was.
So they're moving forward with unrolling their program here in Oregon City and looking for grant support. And I glanced through this letter. I didn't read it, but the only thing it doesn't have in there is in our Natural Resource Committee letterhead and a specific mention of the Natural Resources Committee. So anything you guys want to add to it, we can do. And I would just change the City of Oregon City to the City of Oregon City Natural Resources Committee. And maybe if you guys want, we can include some language about your mission or your goals and how it coincides with that.
So does Gail oversee this grant program?
Apparently, I didn't know that. But
She's
yeah,
an engineer for West.
Right.
Yeah.
And Gail I've known for several years now, and
Right.
she's very passionate about this sort of thing. She was at Metro in their habitat program before she went over to Clackamas County.
Okay.
She, I'll read the order first, and I'll say something else about her.
Yeah, if you want, I can read it out. So.
The Audubon card or the promotional card.
Yeah, so for the viewing audience, the Backyard Habitat Certification Program is an important program that works with the community members to bring regional conservation knowledge and resources to private property owners. The program's 5 certification criteria of removing invasive weeds, planting native species, managing stormwater on site, reducing or eliminating pesticide usage, and wildlife stewardship are integral to our natural resources goals in Oregon City. The program provides urban landowners with the information and tools to take action, which will support and add to the work being done by the city. In addition, by educating landowners on how they can manage stormwater on site, they will be supporting the city's stormwater management skills by providing a level of education about this topic that can make them more interested in how they can support stormwater management in the region and on a larger scale. Participants in Oregon City will not only help the creeks and rivers in our city stay cleaner and cooler by planting streamside and not using pesticides and other toxins, they will also be more educated about stormwater in general, and then it goes on.
That's great.
Very good letter.
Yeah, I think it's well written.
The card listed the sites, but they had the 3,000 some odd sites underway and didn't mention anything in Oregon City. I thought we had a presentation here.
Yeah, they were interested in coming in. I don't think they're doing anything here yet. This is the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right, and
This
they
is
also,
what they're seeking to do.
Oh, okay.
They're expanding currently in Oregon
So
City.
this is an older card that they
Yeah,
gave
good.
before they started when they first approached us. Yeah.
I remember when they gave the presentation, we asked them if they would consider maybe making a little demonstration garden, one of our new parks coming up. And that kind of perked their interest because I think it's a great way to get to our community.
Well, Filbert Run might be a good place to see it.
So I'm saying that,
Good
Philip Run would be good,
because,
the Oak Tree
I mean,
Park would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be a small play facility and some
Yeah.
picnic tables, but the neighborhood in general wanted as primarily a natural area.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
and,
Filbert Run may be a good client.
yeah, and also the Oak Tree Park that's
Yeah.
coming up, because that's got a nice little native oak stand in it, and you could make a real good little demonstration garden amongst those areas. I'm all about demonstration gardens.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Okay. All right, well, I'll get rid of this and
Okay, comments from the,
Are we
sorry.
looking at future agenda items or?
yeah, we can look at, future agenda items. One thing that I wanted to put forward again, and now I forgot it, was putting in, next year, they'll be looking at their 2-year budget again. And pressing for some funding for an arborist. I don't know how far we've gotten. You have been in your discussions, Peter, with people on that topic. But
No.
yeah, but the thing is, I think the budget process starts something like in March or something of next year.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things need to really be brought into their budget cycle for the next their two-year budget cycles. And so, and I think it's the kind of the traditional June 1st through or something like that, whatever the government's by.
Actually, it's July 1.
July 1 through the end of June.
Yeah, I think you're right,
For a two-year
Nancy.
cycle, so it follows that same thing. So that's one of the agenda items we'll want to pull up on and have discussions about that.
And have it ready before June? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, have it ready before they start their budget meetings, which would be March.
Oh, March?
Yeah. Next year.
Oh, okay.
March.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the second year of our
All right,
budget
okay,
cycle.
I get it now.
So,
Okay, fine.
yeah, and it might be a good idea to maybe, Pete, to have Laura come in and have a part of that discussion.
Yeah,
I'd
definitely.
sure like to see.
Definitely.
I mean, we're not going to get any headway unless the director of the department
Right, I agree with
is going to actually push it as a budget item.
Right.
Sure
and,
be nice to see
it's
a
also-
natural function specialist, and I'm saying that in a general term, that could interrelate to different departments, and arborist is a very specialized position. You know, if the city wanted to have that, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but somebody that could relate to the different departments, public works and others that are working on the ground, and with the intention of encouraging best practices, you know, this thing that we're talking about here. Proper pruning techniques that are not so inhibitive or more natural structure, you know, the
Yeah.
wildlife ecology theme.
Well, part of it, and I think it's important because we pushed it so hard, is people are not going to be able to most people are not going to fork out the monies required to do putting things on the heritage tree list.
Oh, okay, now I remember, I was remembering.
That was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
kind of the
Now I
major
remember.
focus
Now I
of that
remember, yeah.
particular discussion.
Yeah, you're right, okay.
And so,
It was to help mitigate the costs.
for
individual
the
people.
city helping to mitigate
Right,
the cost,
exactly, that's what I
right?
meant. yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, all right, well, that sounds like an important thing.
And there are trees in the public right-of-way that should be evaluated. So, yes, was there something else on the agenda item that people wanted to?
I would really, I mentioned this a couple months ago, I think. This whole solid waste recycling thing is unwinding right now.
Yeah.
Because of the so-called market issue that was never there to begin with. I'm just going to say how I feel. I'd love to see Rick Winterhalter come in from the county and give us an update of what the state of the situation is. And I'd also like to see a hauler, Pam Bloom, our hauler, come in, or somebody from her company, explain the interfaces and problems they're having now, to get a picture of, one, what the regulatory and desirous things are for recycling, and then what the realities are on the ground.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
No problem with Rick, but I was going to make the recommendation, he works with the county, to actually, Pete, could you check with the county of who they would want to send?
Or whoever.
Yeah, somebody from the county.
Yeah.
It could be Rick, he lives in Oregon City, and
My
It's
neighbor
interesting.
lives a half a block away.
yeah, but, make the request, not to the individual,
each other
but
all
to
the
the
time.
county.
Okay.
You want
All
to
right,
talk about
however you wanna do
heritage
it.
trees, he's got a honker out in front of his.
Yeah, he does. He cut one of them down.
He needs
It's still
help.
big, huge things sitting out there. He keeps trying to find somebody who wants,
Yeah.
somebody's taking it.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Well,
tell him.
Portland, just to let you know, I heard this, Bruce Walker, I've known him all my life. He's the solid waste recycling coordinator for Portland. And they're now talking about imposing a $3, minimum $3 per month, a new surcharge to deal with this problem of no markets. And I'm thinking, you know, it'd be interesting to see what Pam's perspective on this would be
Eugene
too.
is
Just,
You know,
really
Our
restricted
hall.
what they're gonna pick up.
yeah, so,
Yeah, Portland just, I think, increased their rates too.
pardon?
I think the city of Portland just increased their recycling rates
Yeah,
as well.
Okay, I'll make sure I get a hold of Rick.
Okay.
Increase rates, we just need to know what we're
Yeah,
going
and
to
Pam Bloom, I'd
What's
love to
the
have her as
gentleman's,
well.
who else was that?
She had a BB and Lisa,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oregon City Garbage.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, communications. You want to talk about the,
Well, the enhancement, the city enhancement planting along The promenade was fantastic. I didn't get to go see the Boy Scouts change out the flag, and I really want to because that's always good for a good cry for me. I love to see that kind of sentimental stuff. But I was on the group 1 and 2 that was down at the bottom by the VFW, who hosted the whole event, and a lot of city people there. And Brian French gave a really, really, really great presentation on the oak tree, white oaks, and not heritage trees, but what were they called?
Champion tree.
Champion trees. And we have some close ones here, and I would really encourage, him to come and maybe we
Yeah,
can
it was
point
a good
those out
presentation.
and tote those up. I also had Dempsey to put him on the spot because he was an Oregon City guy. And of course I said, want to volunteer as an arborist? Of course, always trying to get somebody to volunteer their time.
Right.
So I'll call him and tell him I did it just because it was a chance to say that in front of all the city people. Shame on me, but it was such a well-attended. There were like 75 people that signed up, and that rainy, stormy day started off with a rainbow, came down with hail, pouring rain, and everyone got the job done.
We got lucky
Awesome.
with the weather because it seemed to hit as soon as everybody wrapped up.
I know, it was just, and then I think we finished with the double rainbow before then we were really rained upon. It was, but the spirit was great, little kids were there, and that's what was really exciting, when you see young parents with their kids, because they were out there poking and digging rocks, and so they got a drought-tolerant garden, demonstration garden planted, the medium strip, and then up ahead, they did some plantings of white oak along the bluff. Pointed out a really cool oak tree that's splintered up amongst basalt. You think, how can that thing survive? Well, because it's an oak. And we're going to save every oak we find, whether it has a hole or a little.
When you go on the promenade, you wanted to take a look at some of those oaks right out the promenade.
Yeah.
There's a cleft in the basalt, and there's this tree that's expanded in there, and it's really impressive. I can't believe it's getting the nutrients it needs, but obviously
Right.
it is.
And
This looks like it's growing right out of the soil. It's really impressive.
One of the things Brian French said about white oaks is that he was seeing some sites where the basalt was so hot, it was like 104 degrees or something like that.
140 degrees. I mean, it was like so hot you couldn't believe.
Yeah, and they,
Fried egg
and they
hot.
were incredibly resilient.
It was just hot, happy little oaks, yeah.
Surprising.
He mentioned a white oak on Central Point Road, and I live right off of it, and I'm pretty sure I know the one he's talking about. You talk about a developer doing the right thing. The sidewalk curves right around it.
That's-
And so
That's the kind of stuff that we
that's
should
the kind of
show
stuff that we should
pictures to
really
our
show, because it's a magnificent tree in its own right, but it also demonstrates what developers can do.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But the
trees,
city, I've got some kind of a maple that the county planted years ago. And we replaced our sidewalk, and when we did, the city made the suggestion of actually curving the sidewalk to accommodate that tree's roots, which,
When was that, Nancy?
probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, yeah.
So it may have been the
But I
city
was-
that made that recommendation.
No, I don't
to
know why I
develop,
didn't
but
think of it.
It sure got
but the city
done.
said, you should do that. Oh, that's
we
a
need
great
to put
idea.
in our little packets to say,
Walk on the
we're a
sidewalk
city
and fall
trying,
off.
you know?
Good, very good.
And we'll embrace you if you try with us, you know?
Yeah.
We won't make it the enemy.
So does anybody else want to say anything?
I was just going to mention, I came to the hearing last night, or the urban renewal work session, to hear more discussions on mitigation in the Cove, and the developer from Vancouver, BC, Mr. Mooney, David, made it very clear when the council was asking questions, is this really important, this mitigation stuff? He said, it's livability. Well, is this required? He said, I won't build without addressing livability. And this is the Cove's water quality, which, you know, we've talked about this a little bit. I mean, I know that subject really well, inside and out, what's going on down there. And the questions they were asking were, how long does it take to deal with the process of putting together a mitigation package? And the developer had his representative here, who was new in this area. Most of his stuff was up in Seattle, but I guess he's used to working with him. And then John Runyon came in. We've had John Runyon here, I think, before, haven't we? And John knows this man too. Anyway, the point being, it became kind of clear at this time and place, the ability to sell mitigation credits is not going very well because it's a cyclical thing. And John made that very clear, I think, to myself and the city here maybe 2 years ago when we first got involved in this whole thing, that you got to take advantage of it when it's there. It isn't there right now. But the question from the developer standpoint, this is a big company out of Vancouver, BC that's building phase 2 of the Cove, is we're going to do this. We have to do this because we have to meet livability requirements for our patrons, and we want this to happen. And I thought that was a very good statement. With or without mitigation credits, we're going to do some stuff. I thought that was really impressive to hear that.
Yeah.
The Cove is a very difficult project because of all sorts of issues. But anyway.
And those are the things we should champion.
Exactly.
And those are the things we should champion.
Yes,
Say,
absolutely.
look at here.
Really,
You know,
yeah, right. So,
you may not be the
Jerry.
number one.
Yeah,
I don't know what your take on it is.
Well,
One of the better.
I wasn't aware of what the content of that presentation was until recently, so I'm glad you reported on that. And
we need to have, I'm going to talk about another agenda item in the future, might be the architect, Lloyd Hill. Lloyd come in and speak to us about the whole thing, you know, and where it stands, because he's really coordinating the
Right.
on-site.
Lloyd, I work with,
Efforts.
and then the other consultant is.
I mean, that's our biggest natural resource area right now, you know.
The next
In addition to all the
phase-
wonderful things, you guys are doing some great things with Watershed Council, you really are.
Right.
Yeah.
But from a one standpoint contiguous area, it's pretty impressive.
So, yeah, I think they want to come in and amend the master plan and do the second phase, which is the area closest to the Cove.
Yeah.
And so when they do that, they would be talking about, you know, what the future phases are and how far out the restoration phase would be. Because I think it's either going to be phase 3 or phase 4. And I know they want to move forward with phase 2 fairly quickly, so, but they have to come in and apply and do that. So it would be an NROD application, updating the original 2009 approval, which was a water resource application, and they called that so. Under their master plan, the Planning Commission had approved a 50-foot buffer around the original high water mark. And so that continues through the subsequent amendments. And then but there's some modifications to the site plan, obviously, because of things on, and then the planting plan continues. And they're not gonna, what is it? The in-water work part of it is very complicated because it requires not just city approval, but the Corps of Engineers and various other agencies as well. So that's something that they're still working on.
Nancy, anything?
I have nothing.
Huh?
Wow.
Okay, couple things. On the 21st, the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council is having the junior ROTC come out to work again on invasives there at Abernethy Creek Park. I think we'll have everybody we need there in terms of volunteers because some middle school students are been asked by the GROTC to also participate in that effort. But something else is occurring, if anybody has the time. They're doing their last planning at the Environmental Learning Center on the 21st too.
Okay.
So they still have planning material to put in. Like all
4,000 plants. 4,000.
Yes, but they put a lot of them in now. I mean,
Oh,
and I know you've done a lot of work there.
but there's still 4,000 left.
Well, it's 4,000.
Yes.
Well,
I got this call.
If they got, well, how about all that material you salvaged? Is any of that going back in?
Well, and that went into, yeah, I put that in too.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, we did. Okay, so your
So,
project's on the 21st and that's on the 21st?
Yes, those are
Okay,
two
ELC.
projects going,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
if you haven't got to the ELC, Jerry's done some great
Oh,
work there on the pathways and so forth, and it's not yet open, but if you get there and do the planning, you'll be able to see, you know, you just can sneak in, but you can sneak in legitimately by being a volunteer doing
And it's
planning.
really neat.
As a volunteer.
Doug and probably 6, 8, maybe 10 people came together to salvage plants. Initially, they're going to mow down all these snowberries and other things of that nature, and we were able to save thousands of them, and you used some too.
Yeah.
But now the latest thing is the bridges. The welding department, students, these are 32-foot long beams, I-beams. Takes 2 I-beams per bridge. And the man in charge up there said, "Do you got any ideas how to get them in there?" I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" He said, "I want to bring in a crane." I said, "My goodness, the crane boom is going to have a long reach to do this." Okay. And so I said, "What's the weight?" He said, "I don't know." So I went over to the welding department folks, and then John Borden and I lifted up the end of one. So it's got to be a 600-pound beam if we can lift up one end. And the question was, could you drag it out there with tractor, small tractor, very small, on the trails that we put in there, and then snake it across the junior ROTC, literally, carefully, and put it in place, because it might be, so they're trying to investigate iron workers rigging it for cranes, and they're talking about a helicopter. There's 7 bridges. And they didn't get done in time, you know, to be put in place before trails and everything else had to be done too. So it's an interesting, but the whole thing's looking really good. It's a nice looking situation, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Pete, anything else?
No, I don't have anything else.
I'll mention that the Oregon City Parks Foundation did another very successful ivy pull in the very beginning of the month, and I want to say April 4th or something. Shame on me. It was a beautiful Sunday, and poured down rain.
Saturday.
It was Saturday, and it poured down rain, but it doesn't make any difference when it rains in the woods.
Right.
And
If you're pulling up,
Daryl, who was originally our homeless vet, who's now has a home in Oregon City, now moving to
Good,
Malala,
good deal.
brought 2 other volunteers.
Well, that's great for him. That's great.
And we have spurred on another young gentleman, and I have met more of our community pulling ivy and slushing up. It has been so rewarding. And families are coming up, and little kids, and it's really exciting. So, and now we're doing these impromptu pulls. People can post and say online if they're going there, and if not, you just run into other people and say, "Hey, are you here to ring a tree with ivy?" And they say, "Oh yeah, you're just running into, I'm running into strangers." One person didn't even live in our city, he was gonna meet someone else up there, and he had his little crowbar, and I said, "Well, you know, I can't find my friend, so come with us, we'll eventually find him." So it's really wonderful, it's very catchy, and I was in the park and I almost cried, because it was so beautiful. I was running with my dog, and where you see the ivy and rocks that have not seen light for 30 years, there are people building little hoodoos, little stacking rocks all up in there. So they're climbing up onto the rocks, making little stacking sculpture rocks, balancing little pieces of wood up there.
People are doing this?
Oh, it's
Could it be
man.
spirits doing
Let spirits do it. There is many spirits up in that, because
Or maybe people
again,
that-
we were
maybe
on
people
the
that are
Trail
on
of
spirits.
Tears. On the Trail of Tears. But again, it is, you clean it, you move it, they will come. And then you can see it, and there
That's
are
right.
legs hidden up in the rocks. And that was just cute.
Well, I just
I'm
want to
just kinda
clarify
curious.
something to the good doctor here. Dr. McLaughlin. I took plants to Europe and planted the Scottish Hills. Don't ever accuse me of bringing ivy to your country.
But I'll tell you.
David Douglas would have said.
Well, I will tell you, what you did is you took Doug firs back there and planted them.
I know, I didn't know that. There's huge acreages, thousands of acres of Doug fir and Sitka spruce. In Scotland, where it was deforested, I'm trying to become David Douglas in my old age. You got all these other people, McLaughlin, these,
The
commoners.
the only difficulty was that he died in the Sandwich Islands at a fairly young age.
That's true.
So you better get a wig, you better get a wig
I've
or
been to the
something.
doctor's pit, it's on the Big Island up on the side of Kilauea, and there's somebody built a mound up there in like the 30s or the 40s, a group did, to memorialize him, and so you can get up there, and there's a big stand of Doug Fur's
Yes,
pit. They're not
yeah,
doing as well as they do here.
That's
But
not.
it's high enough up,
Have you
know.
actually seen them, the
Yeah.
trees?
Yeah.
How big are they? I mean,
They're about this big around.
Well, the Doug Furs are widely spread in North America.
well, and he described Willamette Falls in his journals. I didn't know this. There's information in his journals about the falls, its height, and the floods that he observed, and I didn't know that. This 1828 or so, or something like that.
Impressive guy.
When you were getting your start here, he was already describing the country.
But he was younger than I at that time, too. I had to start before I ever came to the Oregon Territory. Three of my children were already grown.
I have to learn how to do what he does, and I don't know how to do it yet. I've been working at it.
The only trouble is, the accent isn't correct. His daughter had written a letter to the effect that he actually had a French-Canadian accent and not a Scottish accent.
David?
There you go.
David or?
No, John
Oh,
McLaughlin.
John.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really? Is that what they say? Okay.
That's what his daughter said.
Oh. Okay. All
Get
right.
out of here.
Yes. So that,
All right.
we're getting off topic, sort of.
Well, great. Yeah, no, it's